the future of neurological care. And I'm Donna Walsh, and I'm Executive Director of EFNA. I know many of you, and there's lots of familiar faces in today's audience, but there's also lots of new faces in today's audience, and we really have a great mix of stakeholders with us today. So I'm really looking forward to having a lively and interactive session. Now, the reason that EFNA has organized this webinar is because over the last number of months, we've been working hard to produce a series of e-learning modules on the theme of personalized health and social care in neurology. And those modules are now available online via our e-learning platform. But we realized that these self-guided e-learning platforms maybe aren't the most interactive or dynamic space. And we thought it would be really nice to bring all of the community together, to bring in some external experts to really tease out some of the challenges and opportunities in this space. But before we get to that interactive part of the discussion, where you will have the opportunity to take the floor, to raise your comments, to questions, to interact with our polling over the course of the morning, we're going to start by having an introduction to the topic. And this intervention will be provided by Dr. Maria Teresa Ferretti of the Women's Brain Project. And she's going to tell us a little bit about what personalized healthcare in neurology really means and why it is so important today. So let's take a listen to what Maria Teresa has to say. And throughout this video, feel free to put your questions, comments, and so on in the chat box, and we'll take those up in the discussion later. So let's have a look. We've got no sound on the video, Elizabeth.
My name is Maria Teresa Ferretti.
Working now.
I'm a neuroscientist and a neuroimmunologist, and I'm the co-founder and chief scientific officer of a non-profit organization called Women's Brain Project. The Women's Brain Project advocates for the study of sex and gender differences as the gateway to precision medicine.
So before we start, I actually thought it would be good to give you some definitions and explanations, because you might have heard of personalized healthcare, but also personalized medicine and precision medicine. And sometimes it's not so clear what is the difference in the meaning of all these terms. So I would like to give you a couple of definitions, at least in terms of what I refer to in the context of this module. When we talk about personalized healthcare, we are talking about a new approach in medicine that puts the patient at the center of the healthcare process. And I like to use the analogy of the Vitruvian Man that was drawn by Leonardo, as this is the symbol of the Renaissance concept of the man being at the center of the universe. And exactly like for the Renaissance intellectuals, man should be at the center of the universe, the same thing is happening in medicine. We are coming to the conclusion that man should be at the center of the process. And exactly as Leonardo drew this square and this round circle around the man, the Vitruvian Man, the same way solutions for patients should be designed around and tailored around the patient. So in this new approach and model of medicine, patients are the subjects of the process. They are not objects. So they are active players and they are agents of change. Now, of course, patients should be at the center of the process, but that does not mean that there is only one way to do this, because patients are not all equal and one size does not fit all. First of all, there is variability in our genes. And so personalized medicine was the first response to this. And this is a type of medicine that takes into consideration the fact that actually decisions regarding prevention, diagnosis, and treatment should consider the fact that patients are different based on their genes and genomics. So that's where precision medicine comes into play. Precision medicine looks at a number of features of a patient or of an individual. looks at genetics, demographic, biomarkers, environment, lifestyle of a person. So tries to understand and characterize the specific features of every person. And this allows to identify subgroup of patients that can benefit of certain solutions. And so by characterizing the patient and knowing in which subgroup he belongs, then you can actually select solutions that can work for that specific patient in the best possible way. So this is not an easy concept. So I thought I would explain a bit better also with an infographic. So the idea of precision medicine is that patients are not all equal. So we're not this gray man that all look the same in this drawing. Actually, what happens is that we are all different, and we can characterize. Precision medicine aims at characterizing the features of every single person, so that every single person, as you see in the image, has a different color, let's say. So this means that actually we have specific characteristics, and even in the same disease, so people that have the same diagnosis, in the same group of patients, you will have subgroups of patients that have specific characteristics, that express certain molecules, that have certain symptoms, that have a certain response to drugs. And so it's important to know these subtypes and subgroups, because then you can tailor any treatment and any strategy to the specific needs of that specific patient. I'm sure you're all aware that diagnosis for a neurological disorder takes years. In many cases, it's super long. Here are some examples: 2 years for multiple sclerosis or for Alzheimer, 1 year for Parkinson and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So in neurology in general, there is a very long process for the diagnosis, which tends to also have misdiagnosis and various issues. It's a very complicated diagnosis in many cases. There is very low use of biomarkers, and the treatment, and again, I think many of you have experienced that, it's actually often based on trial and error. The typical example is migraine patients that normally are started on one treatment, and then you see how it goes, and then maybe in 1 year you decide whether this works or not. And of course, this is already something in the direction of precision medicine, because it means that the doctor is trying to tailor the treatment based on your needs. But imagine how much better would be, instead of going through the trial and error process, to know already in advance, based on a bunch of tests and biomarkers, whether you will be responding to a certain drug or not. So what is the opposite of precision medicine? The opposite of precision medicine is shallow medicine. And this is a term that was coined by Dr. Eric Topol. And I think it's very useful to explain the concept. I'm showing you here an example of some data from a study done on some of the highest selling drugs in the US. And I think this applies to Europe as well. You might be familiar with some of the drugs you see here, for instance, Humira or Copaxone. Let's look at Copaxone, for instance, for multiple sclerosis. So what this infographic is showing you is that actually out of how many they are, 16 patients that are taking Copaxone for multiple sclerosis, there is only one, the little blue man that you see there, there is only 1 out of 16 that is having some type of therapeutic benefit out of this drug. So all the other ones, the other red little men, they are taking the drug, they are having most likely side effects of the drug. Their insurer or payer is paying for this drug, or the national healthcare system, or whatever that is. So there are costs, and yet the drug is not working. And again, this is something I think many of us are familiar with, the trial and error. So these are people that are taking a drug, the drug is not working. After 1 year, maybe with the doctor, you decide that you want to try something else. And this can go through various cycles. And the point that I want to make here is that this approach to medicine, being shallow, has huge cost for everybody, has huge cost for the patient, because actually you're asking a patient to take a drug and very often to have side effects without having a benefit. But it also has a cost for the society at large. As we are developing drugs that are actually not working, we are still paying for them. And in some cases, drugs are withdrawn from the market because of severe side effects. And so the whole cost of drug development is actually completely lost. So this whole model of medicine, based on the idea that drugs should just work for everybody the same way, is actually not sustainable. And I want to give a couple of examples to explain a bit better this idea. The examples I'm going to give to you are related to sex and gender differences in medicine. And this is something I'm particularly passionate about in my role as a Chief Scientific Officer of the Women's Brain Project. So when we talk about precision medicine, one of the most obvious differences between patients will be, of course, the sex. So if you are a man or you are a woman. Now, what happens is that during drug development in the past decades, actually, this was not really taken into consideration. For a very long time, women were excluded from clinical trials with the idea of protecting women in their fertile age. So the idea was actually to protect them, but this backfired because it created, in the drug development process, it created a gap, so a knowledge gap. Therefore, we actually didn't know the safety profile of a number of drugs in women. We were just assuming that because these drugs proved to be safe in men, they would also be safe in women. Well, guess what? They weren't. It wasn't. And in 2001, the United States General Accounting Office published a report showing that out of 10 drugs that were withdrawn from the market, 8 were causing more severe side effects in women. And this is a well-known phenomenon in general in drug development, that actually women tend to suffer more of side effects from drugs, or different side effects compared to men. And there are a number of biological reasons for that. The point is that now, of course, drug developers and regulators have realized that this is an issue and things have improved. And of course, women are involved in clinical trials and we are checking very carefully the safety profile. But we still have a number of drugs that were developed in the past that have these issues. And for instance, a very famous example is zolpidem. So this is a so-called ZDrug. You might be familiar with it because it's very often taken by almost by everybody to treat people when you have issues with sleep. So it's a drug to treat insomnia. And at some point when the drug was released and put into the market, so we were in the pharmacovigilance stage, there were a number of reports indicating that there were a lot of accidents, car accidents, that were linked to the fact that the person was taking the drug zolpidem the night before. And actually it turned out that the vast majority of these accidents were happening to women. And upon further investigation, it was found that actually women have a lower clearance, is called. So they take longer time to eliminate the drug from their system. So they still had some drug in the morning. And the result was that they were dizzy. And so it was more likely for them to have these accidents. So now, after figuring all this out, FDA recommends lowering the dose for women. And it's actually half than the one given to men. And so this is a very, in my opinion, very clear example of an issue that exists and we should tackle for the future in the design of future drugs. Just the fact that you cannot assume that drugs will work the same way in men and women. You cannot assume that we will work the same way in all patients. And it's absolutely fundamental to characterize the work of the action of drugs, the safety, and a number of other things, diagnostics, preventative strategies in terms of groups of patients. So this is actually a very well-known fact in Alzheimer's disease. You have this, you might have seen this type of graphs. These are called spaghetti graphs. And so if you take just on the left the behavior of one patient, you can measure their memory with a certain test, and you can track how well this patient is doing with his or her memory over months, over time. And so an individual patients might have fluctuations over time, and overall this individual patient was going down. What happens is that when you look at data from more patients, let's say over 200 patients, the picture is much more complicated. And I'm sure you can appreciate that the patients are not all equal. This is a graph representing a population of MCI, mild cognitive impairment patients. So you can see that there are some patients that are even improving, their memory is even going up. Some are staying stable, some are declining, some of them declining really fast, and some, very slowly, almost nothing over 3 years. So imagine how powerful it would be if we were able to know at time 0 who will go which way. if we had some type of biomarker or indicator that would allow us to predict the progression of this disorder, and how useful that would be for the doctors, for the patients, and also in clinical trials to test drugs, not to have all this variability in your sample. So some of this variability is due to the fact that actually, even though the clinical symptoms might be the same, the underlying pathology is actually different. And here I'm bringing you an example from the neuroscience world on a type of dementia that is called late, which stands for limbic predominant age-related TDP-43 dementia. So these patients, clinically, from a clinical standpoint, they look exactly like Alzheimer's patients in the elderly, so they are 80 and above. So clinically, you would say these are Alzheimer's. However, when you have a chance at biopsy autopsy to actually analyze their brains, you're not going to find the typical hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, which are plaques and tangles, amyloid plaques and tangles, but actually you're going to find another type of pathological hallmark. So these deposits of a peptide called TDP-43. So these patients do not have the typical features of Alzheimer's patients. But now imagine the number of clinical trials that have enrolled patients for finding a cure for Alzheimer's disease, enrolling patients just on the basis of clinical symptoms. So all these patients would have ended up in these type of trials, and they would have received an amyloid targeted drug. And of course, this drug had no chance whatsoever to work in these patients because these patients did not have the target of the drug. So this is an example of how important it is to characterize the patients and to identify subgroups of patients and then to design solutions that are targeted to each subgroup. And coming to the sex and gender differences, this is a very important point because even in the biomarker characterized patients, so let's say you just take the mild cognitive impairment patients that actually have amyloid, even in this population, actually even more so, you're going to have differences between groups of patients. And one of the factors that affects the progression of the disease is actually sex. So men and women progress differently. In this graph that I'm showing you here, I hope you appreciate that women, which are the green one, decline much faster than men over the course of 8 years. And actually this has been quantified in this cohort to be actually twice as fast. So once they have a diagnosis, women decline much faster than men, which I think it's a very important information to have. As a patient, you would like to know that, as a doctor. And if you have these women in a clinical trial, this is also important. Now, why is it so? We are still trying to find that out. This is a very active field of investigation where the Women's Brain Project is spearheading research. We know that women seem to mask early stages of the disease. So it's very hard to diagnose early stages, early impairments, because women have an advantage in verbal memory, which is used to detect MCI, for instance. So what we think is happening most likely is that women, even though they already have MCI, they're not diagnosed with MCI, the moment in which the final diagnosis comes, actually they are very advanced in the pathological stage. So compared to men, even though they have the same diagnosis, actually they are much more advanced in the pathological trajectory. And so they already enter that phase of the pathology where you decline very fast. Of course, this is a very interesting field of investigation. And if we manage to figure all this out, we might also think of specific tasks or specific scales to identify diagnosis in women, to promote early diagnosis in women, for instance. So extremely relevant for the Alzheimer's field. According to personalized and precision medicine, healthcare, patients should be at the center of the medical process. And so to implement that, it's absolutely crucial to involve the voice of patients as well as caregivers into the research process itself, because actually patients and caregivers are the experts in a given disease. So it is absolutely important to involve their opinion, not just having them participating into clinical trials and clinical research, which is very important, but also having them as advisors, providing feedback on research agenda, and working with them to generate patient-reported outcomes so that when we are studying, for instance, the effect of a drug, we are sure that we are actually measuring outcomes that are relevant and meaningful to patients and caregivers. And I would like to argue that digital technology that we have in our hands in these days is actually going to be instrumental in this movement towards personalized healthcare and towards, I like to call it, a more democratic approach to medicine, where again, the patient is really a subject and not an object of medical decisions. And when I'm talking about the role of digital technology, I'm thinking about two things. One is the role of social media for the generation of patient networks. And the other one is the use of digital biomarkers. In terms of social media, just very quickly, very briefly, I want to mention that the importance of this tool for patient networks and in general for medicine has been highlighted now during the COVID pandemic and with the emergence of long COVID. Some people say that long COVID was actually created by social media. And what happened is that the patients were the first ones to realize that they had the symptoms. And they started to talk about it on social media. Patients with similar symptoms would group together and form networks. And so these patient networks started to generate, provide evidence and information, share this type of information, compare experiences, started also to ask questions to the research community and started to lobby. And this has actually resulted in a huge interest and mobilization of the research community. And now long COVID is actually a very active field of investigation with a lot of research projects and dedicated funding. And again, this was initiated by patients using social media. So I think this is an amazing tool that we have in our hands. And I'm a believer of the fact that this is a positive development if used properly. But today I would like to spend a bit more time talking about another aspect, another digital technology that can really support patient empowerment and the patient involvement in the healthcare process, already starting from the research models. And this is exactly digital biomarkers. So all these digital biomarkers, they measure something in our body using some digital solution. And the beauty of them is that actually they provide a continuous recording. So instead of you sitting down and measuring your blood pressure once in a while or going to the doctor and having something measured, you can actually have a continuous recording over weeks or months. And this is done in a not invasive way. This is done seamlessly. You don't even realize because you're wearing, let's say, an armband that is taking the measurement, you're not even realizing it, which I think are both huge advantages. But there are even more advantages I would like to talk about. And this graph is here to give an example of how important it might be to implement a digital biomarker for especially, let's say, for testing a drug or a solution for a chronic disorder. This could very well be a neurological chronic disorder that develops over time. So here you see on the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis, the vertical one, the more high you go, the higher you go, the more severe the disease is becoming. So you see this is a disease that is worsening over time, but there are fluctuations. And so in orange or yellow, how you want to call it, you see an example of the typical evaluation outcomes that we normally measure at the clinic. So this, let's say that this is a chronic patient that once a month goes to visit the doctor and has some type of measurement taken that gives an idea of how good or bad is doing the disease. And this is done, let's say, once a month or once every 3 months. And those are the orange squares. While in contrast, the blue shows you all the measurements that a digital biomarker can do. And what this graph is telling you is that actually the digital biomarker has two huge advantages compared to the standard visit to the doctor that you do just once a month. The first one is these gray squares that you might see. So these periods in between clinical visits. So you go today to visit your doctor, you have a certain measurement of a certain scale. And then 1 month passes, your doctor doesn't see you in 1 month, and he sees you after 1 month, measure something. Maybe you can tell your doctor, look, the past month has been really bad, I wasn't feeling so well, but that day of the visit, the measurement is actually totally fine. And the doctor has no way to know in his hands currently what happened during the past months, only relying on your subjective reporting of it, which is super important. But to further validate it, actually digital biomarkers can really help Because if you have a digital biomarker at the next visit with your doctor, the doctor can actually see what happened from the last visit, having all those data points. And in this case, for instance, here could actually see that, yes, there was a worsening. And this is something that actually should be considered. And overall, the promise of digital biomarker is to provide better care and reduce error rates because they are objective and not subjective measurements. So I think they have huge potential for research and then for clinical implementation. So what I would like to do right now is really to encourage you to think about all the different topics that we have been covering and how they can affect you and your journey. And I really encourage you to discuss with your doctors, specialists, GPs, your specific needs, your questions, to actually take the initiative. I know many patients, women that, for instance, notice this fluctuation of symptoms with their menstrual cycle, and they just don't want to talk about it with their doctors because they think this is stupid, maybe it's not important, what he's going to think about me, he or she. But actually, these are important information, and I really encourage to share this type of information with your doctor and to co-create together with your doctor your therapeutic journey. And very important, I think each one of us should take agency over our own brain health. The same way we do for cardiovascular health, we can do it for the brain. So consider that there are things that you can do to prevent a number of diseases. And I'm thinking especially of dementia and stroke. And I mean, this is very, very important. It has been estimated that 40% of dementia cases can be prevented by modifiable risk factors. So, I mean, you have real power in your hands, and with changes in your own lifestyle, you can really make a change for the better for your brain health in the next years. So this is a decision that is up to you. And I think it's very important that you take agency over your own brain health. And finally, I think that if you're a patient or a caregiver or a family member of somebody with a neurological disorder, I encourage you to become an advocate and to talk about personalized healthcare, to stimulate a discussion about this topic, the importance of personalized healthcare, the importance of precision medicine for improving a number of things, from early diagnosis to efficacy and safety of treatments. And so my final word is really to say that you are the key players in this process, and it's up to you now. The next move is yours, and I hope you will be part of this movement. Thank you.
So that was Dr. Maria Teresa Ferretti there of the Women's Brain Project, who I think really has given us a lovely introduction to this topic. And there's lots of themes that came out of that presentation that we'll take on into the discussion sessions that are going to follow over the next hour or so. So given that time is tight, I'm going to jump straight into our first panel discussion, and I would ask anyone who has a question or a comment to continue to put that into the chat, and we'll make sure that we pick up as many of those questions as we can as we run through today's session. So we've got 7 expert panelists ranging from various stakeholder groups here today to take us a couple of steps further into this discussion. In the interests of time, I'm not going to introduce them all one by one, but what I am going to do is ask them to introduce themselves. And after they introduce themselves, to tell us a little bit about why they feel personalized healthcare is important, the work perhaps that they or their organization is doing in this space, what added value, I guess, that it can bring to people living with neurological disorders, and also maybe to start to consider some of the challenges or barriers that we need to overcome if we want to make personalized healthcare in this field a reality now. So Professor Thomas Berger, I'm going to come to you first, and you've got the floor for a couple of minutes to give us your thoughts on this interesting topic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Donna. It's a real honor and pleasure to be part of this discussion panel. My name is Thomas Berger. I am Professor of Neurology and Head of the Department of Neurology at the Medical University in Vienna, Austria, but I'm also here on behalf of the European Academy of Neurology, which is the largest body of clinical neurologists, also neuroscientists across Europe. So with regard to your questions and also the overarching theme of our webinar, I have to state that I believe and I am deeply convinced that personalized healthcare is the future in medicine. And this has something to do with our views, which have changed over the decades or even centuries. And therefore, I don't want to oppose what has happened in the past, but I think we should move on to a new pathway which centralizes around the personalized healthcare. And I think one of the major mantras in this regard is that in the past we believed that a disease affects a person. And I think the change is now that the person is affected by a disease. And this is a small change, but a very tremendously important change. So I think personalized healthcare is the true holistic view, which means that it's not only regarding centralizing the patient in our focus of all our efforts, because to be honest, that's something which we are doing anyway in our daily practice, because the first question, if somebody comes to the office or to a clinical outpatient ward, is not what is your disability status or your amyloid value. The first question is, how do you do? So I think this is very personalized, and therefore I think it's a aggregation, integration of many different dimensions around the personalized healthcare. And we heard a little bit about that already by Maria Teresa before. So it comes from diagnosis to individualized diagnosis. As I said, a person is affected, which also means that the person has an individual profile with regard to risk factors, lifestyle factors, expectations, etc. Then, of course, if this is better defined, we move on in a targeted therapy, by all means, what this term includes, and then goes up to monitoring disease activity, including therapeutic effectiveness. However, it also includes dimensions of the patient, him or herself, because patient-related outcomes, also the use of biosensors, wearable devices, etc., is one of the crucial, I think, new pathways which we need to integrate. And last but not least, of course, it's also important to see the view of our society, including payers, sick funds, health authorizations, because they also have demands and also wishes. I think it's very important because one of the major challenges is, of course, first of all, to be realistic. We should not adhere to wishful thinking or believe that because we change systems or develop much more in detail, that we are ending up with cure promises. I think that's very important, to be realistic on the expectations. And the best thing we can do at the moment, and I think this is really happening and can happen even more in deeper detail, is to integrate all these various systems to provide a possibility and pathway for a true holistic view. And also the holistic view includes, of course, let's say, the correct and detailed and realistic expectations. And this is, I think, something which we're doing in the neuroscience community, including my own department, any other neurological department with some research goals and commitments, but also, of course, the European community, including the EAN.
Thank you very much, Professor Berger. And I liked what you said there at the end around, we need to manage expectations. Potentially we're not only looking for a cure when it comes to personalized healthcare, but we need to take a more holistic approach. And on that one, maybe I'll come to you, Mike Baker, representing Roche and the industry on our call here today. How do you see personalized healthcare from an industry perspective? Do you see it as leading to a cure, or is it more of a step-by-step process?
Yeah, thanks. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Mike. I'm a product leader for personalized healthcare at Roche. So what's personalized healthcare for us? I think it's not a thing. right? It's an end state, it's a goal, it's a place we want to be. And what it means is better care at a lower cost for people in society, and moving away from this one-size-fits-all approach to a situation where every individual gets the best care. How we want to do that is through the convergence of technology, science, data, analytics that help us understand diseases, the impact they have on the people that live with them, and also how healthcare is orchestrated in that space. And optimized. And if we can do that, we can speed the development of medicines, we can provide personalized diagnosis, personalized treatment, but also access to the most efficient and optimal medical interventions for every person, right? So that's the concept. The program I lead is called Floodlights. It's a medical device, a software-based medical device for the management of multiple sclerosis. It embraces many of the concepts in that wonderful starting presentation that you had. We want to collect data between visits and form clinical decision-making. And I think one of the to be perhaps a little provocative, the challenge in this space is not really ideas. There are lots of very wonderful ideas out there. It's how we can translate those into clinical practice quickly, where the adoption of interventions like this can be quite slow. And perhaps also it's the speed of innovation that causes part of that problem. And there's lots of well-meaning programs and ideas, you know, I include ourselves in that. And it creates fragmentation in concepts and approaches. It creates fragmentation in technology. And one of the core challenges we have is how we can work together in different ways to build solutions that meet the needs of the community versus the needs of any one stakeholder in that system. So yeah, that's probably our perspective.
Thanks, Mike. And I like how you spoke about fragmentation, and Professor Berger spoke about integration. So clearly there's a bit of work we need to do in terms of resolving that fragmentation and looking at taking a more integrated approach. I'm going to stick actually with the industry perspective, and I'm going to move now to Shibi Belichu, who leads Biogen's work in the digital health sciences space. Shibi, would you like to build on what Mike has said and maybe tell us a little bit about your views on PHC and what's happening within your organization?
Yes, good morning, and thank you, Donna. That's a pleasure to be with you. I'm a neurologist by background, and I have the chance to lead at Biogen the science department within a newly formed organization that we call Biogen Digital Health, that has an actually bold mandate to do sort of what we talk about today, to actually be serious about attempting to make personalized medicine solutions become a reality in neuroscience, which is quite a challenge. That's technically an organization which is neither in R&D nor in medical, that however serves both, and that truly aim to transform the way we run clinical trials so that we enhance precision and resolution, in particular in the measurements of disease course, because we strongly believe personalized healthcare can only become a reality if we transform the resolution of how we go after disease characterization. And in particular, we heard that from Maria Teresa Ferretti, the understanding of heterogeneity. It is particularly a problem in neurological disorders because the central nervous system is already formidably complex and heterogeneous in a healthy state. It becomes even more complex and heterogeneous in a disease state. And we have to confess that so far, as we heard already in the intro talk, we've mostly underappreciated that dimension to actually do a better job going after that. It's about transforming the instruments, and what we do at Biogen Digital Health, on the one hand, is about rethinking the way we want to go after detecting change in disease in clinical trials. It's particularly important if you think about Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, in those phase 2 studies where technically you're trying to find a signal that your drug is doing something, and you're struggling because the conventional instruments we've used so far that are mostly subjective measurement, rater-based, and infrequent are actually very noisy and have a poor signal detection capacity. So introducing their digital health technology and actually trying to develop with those instrument measurement of the unseen part of the disease is a lot of what we do. On the other hand, with the same instrument, we try to think also in an ambidextrous way that those instruments could also be used directly in routine care. And by definition, especially you heard Mike speaking of floodlight, Biogen is sort of copying what Roche has spearheaded in that space, trying to put in the hands of the patient indeed active test paradigms that can be embedded into a smartphone that could just increase the data density, empower the patient to measure themselves at higher frequency in a more ecological way, to just transform the dialogue between the patient and the physician, and technically be more certain when we say that the patient is stable or changing, worsening or improving, that this is reflecting the disease truth. Importantly, lastly, what I would not want to kind of ignore is that this is a journey, and we're probably just at the beginning of speaking seriously of personalizing medicine development. It will take a lot of scientific effort, and in particular, a transformation of the type of capabilities that we use. We need a combination of disease area knowledge, typically neurologists or people that are dealing with care delivery on a routine way, but more importantly, we need data scientists and advanced analytical experts that are understanding neuroscience and bring those competencies in the same room. That's technically what we're doing within Biogen Digital Health.
Thank you, Shibi, and interesting to hear you talk about, the measurements that are needed. And on that note, I want to maybe come on and bring Anke Peggy Holtorf into the discussion, because Anke Peggy, I know you're doing a lot of work around health outcomes, and maybe you could build on what Shibi has just been saying in terms of, how personalized healthcare can help us achieve, the health outcomes that really matter most.
Thank you, Donna. Yeah, as somebody who advises pharma companies, diagnostic companies in relation to value in healthcare, I've been involved in personalized healthcare projects since, I guess, the late 90s. And as a member of a work group at ISPOR, the International Society of Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research, on the subjects of personalized medicines, or later precision medicine, I had the opportunity to discuss this in quite some detail, and having published on these questions. There are so many terms used to describe connected concepts in a way: precision medicine, personalized healthcare, stratified medicines, individualized medicine. Somehow all related, somehow maybe all different, and what they mean may be different to each person who uses them, depending on the context they come from. For me, coming from Switzerland, precision medicine sounds like clockwork. We do exactly the right thing at the right time for the right person, which is probably in most cases still a bit of wishful thinking. The term personalized or even individualized healthcare sounds a bit warmer to me. We use all accessible biological, technological means to understand what the current disease is, the health determinants are, what the available therapy options are, which would best address these descriptors. And then we see what the personal context and the preferences of the people are who are concerned by this. And then we decide together, based on all this evidence, on what therapy is the most suitable. And then we document everything electronically to make it available to learn for the future based on the outcomes we measure there. So kind of like this inherent improvement cycle is for me also an important part of personalized healthcare.
Thank you, Anke Peggy. And on that, I'm now going to bring Juan Carlos into the discussion. And Juan Carlos, you are coming at this from the payer's perspective. And I saw a comment from Annette in the chat who was talking about how we really need to use this new approach to care to stop prescribing treatments to people who don't work. But on the flip side, we may be then developing much more expensive types of treatments. So what's the payer's view on personalized healthcare and what's happening in that space?
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction, Donna. Well, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. So I'm Juan Carlos Parrilla, and I'm a senior researcher at the Andalusian Health Technology Assessment Unit. And I must give the usual boring disclaimer that I'm here to express my own views on personalized medicine and the state of art in HTA, and not necessarily the views of official views of my institution. Now, I currently work as a senior researcher specialized on HTA, but before that, I studied pharmacy, and I say that to sort of introduce that concept of stratified medicine, where sort of my first interest in this topic was as a pharmacist. It's incredibly interesting to that idea that you can predict whether medicine will work in a specific patient based on the genetic profile, or on whether they are fast or slow metabolizer of a specific drug, or they express or don't express a receptor. And then when I studied health economics and health policy, then I started thinking, well, that the concept is even more interesting, because well, actually, that, as you said, Donna, and a member of the audience mentioned, that idea of not having to work on a trial and error basis is very interesting from a health economics perspective, because obviously that can bring massive efficiencies to the system. And now, when I started looking into this, that was the concept stratified medicine, but at the same time, sort of that was more a term that was more used in Europe more commonly. And then in the US, as it was said in the introduction previously, they were talking more about precision medicine or personalized medicine. First, personalized medicine was more sort of putting the patient at the center of care, personalized healthcare as well, taking into account patient preferences in a different way, using different sources. Precision medicine brings by the digital biomarkers that were mentioned before, the use of health apps, different sources of information. So at the end, we are talking about using innovative sources of data, be it genomics or be it digital biomarkers, to sort of tailor the therapies more to the individual patients. Now, that tailoring of interventions sort of departs from traditional medicine in that it's using innovative sources. So it's basing it in their disease susceptibility, diagnostic or prognostic information, or different treatment response based on those different types of information sources, right? Be it genomics, be it digital biomarkers, and so on. And that exactly is what brings us to the challenges that we are facing in HTA. It's different types of technologies that need different considerations to be assessed. Some of these digital biomarkers are based on complex artificial intelligence algorithms that behave in a very interesting way from a health technology assessment perspective, or even a guideline development perspective, in the sense that they are not static technologies that respond the same way throughout their lifetime, but they are technologies that evolve, that learn from the information that you feed them. And so it is a huge challenge to think about how often do you need to reassess those technologies, how often do you need to update a guideline, etc. The use of health apps as well will also bring by innovations and benefits to health technology assessment, in the sense that, as it was also mentioned before, we are talking sometimes about stated patient preferences, but these apps will give us a lot of information about actually revealed health preferences and revealed attitudes and relationships to the health technology, right? And these omics-based tests and technologies are massively interesting, but also bring by different challenges, in the sense that perhaps we need to look into health technology assessment differently and start looking into health service assessment, even, because some of these tests are not really tests, but are just platforms that, like Foundation One, for example, that are actually giving you information about the treatment response to pretty much every treatment there is in oncology and in other disease areas, and so it's you can't really assess it as a one test. It's much more complex than that, and it could shape a whole service, right? So those are basically the changes and the challenges that we need to face in health technology assessment, the key ones at least, and that we will surely be discussing in more detail throughout the session.
Absolutely. We can come back, I think, and pick up on some of those key points as we move through the discussion today. And I see that people are putting questions in the chat as well. So please do continue to do so, and we'll try to come to all of those throughout the morning. Marcelo, I'm going to come to you now, because you look at this from a little bit of a different lens, I guess, in that you were involved in the study of neural ethics. What's the relationship between ethics and personalized healthcare?
Yes, thank you, Donna. And yes, you're right. So I'm a bioethicist and a neuroethicist at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. And I think that we as ethicists share the central goal of personalized health and personal and precision medicine, like everyone else on this very interesting panel, namely delivering healthcare tailored to the individual patient, and thereby helping to prevent, diagnose, and treat patients more effectively and quickly. In my field, we are particularly interested in ensuring that this calibration of care to the needs of the individual is done in a patient-centered way. In particular, I'm interested in what we call patient-centered and ethically aligned technology design and development, especially for technologies for personalized health. So we work with technologies such as artificial intelligence, digital phenotyping, brain-computer interfaces, which hold potential for revolutionizing healthcare as we know it, and thereby they hold potential for being a major help for the millions of people living with neurological disorders worldwide. However, in order to truly contribute to personalized health, these technologies should not be developed in a top-down way, as it often happens nowadays, with the patient being merely a passive recipient of pre-designed and predetermined technologies, but should operate on an equal, should be involved in the design and development process on an equal footing, and be a sort of co-designer of these technologies to make sure that the needs and wishes and expectations of the patients are incorporated into technology design and development. And only in this way we could have truly ethical technologies in this field.
Thanks, Marcelo. And that actually leads me nicely to our last panelist, who's been waiting patiently, Rochelle Flanagan. And Rochelle, I think what Marcelo's saying as a patient advocate must be music to your ears, that, you know, patients need to be at the center of this. Can you maybe give us your views on personalized healthcare from that angle?
Yeah, don't know where to start. There's so much come out of the previous speakers. So I suppose just to give a quick backdrop to myself, I am a person who was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease when I was pregnant with my second child at the age of 47 or 46. I am a dietitian, and I picked up my diagnosis myself through micrographia writing in my record cards. And I've been living with it now for 5 years. So I suppose being a healthcare professional myself, I knew that, you know, working with patients with chronic disease, it's really important. I would always encourage them to get involved in their own self-care and their own advocacy. And with regard to my neurological condition, I actually hid it for 2 years because I was afraid of the stigma around it in terms of people's, you know, opinion. I have celiac disease. I had no problem advocating for it, but I was a bit nervous about Parkinson's. I then went to the World Parkinson's Congress, which is the biggest congress in the world for people with Parkinson's, that has neurologists, scientists, advocates, and their family attend. And it was very inspirational to see, you know, people standing up for themselves and connecting with the scientists and the neurologists and the various healthcare professionals to drive basically, you know, better therapies. And, you know, ultimately, yes, we'd love a cure, but in the short run, we'd like something that would stop or slow the progression would be good. But to date in Parkinson's, there is neither. And there's this golden thing at this 10 years time, we'll have I'm already in my 5 years into the 10 years frame, and there's no sign of anything bar exercise slowing progression. So I suppose in terms of just a couple of things, yeah, I think patient really surely should be a dead term in terms of personalized medicine. I am a person who happens to be living with Parkinson's. And I think, that needs to be taken into account because patient is a very passive term. I think in terms of personalized healthcare, yeah, I mean, ultimately what they say about someone with Parkinson's, you meet one person with Parkinson's, you meet one person with Parkinson's. It's all individual. Although the symptoms are, across very many different people, they are different for different people. There are many motor symptoms, but a huge amount of non-motor symptoms, which are not, a lot of healthcare professionals are not aware of, let alone the researchers. So I suppose for me, personalized healthcare is really about having my healthcare tailored to my needs based on my age, my gender, and my lifestyle. I want to be able to live the best life I can with the disease I have, whatever the neurological or chronic disease is. And I think that needs to be embedded in personalized healthcare. I think in terms of research as well, it needs to be tailored to, my profile. Again, one approach does not fit all. And we're seeing it with the research into alpha-synuclein, that there's a lot of debate that maybe people are going down the wrong rabbit hole. And, in terms of women, for example, with Parkinson's, there's quite different symptoms. So women with Parkinson's tend to have more dyskinesia, and that is partly due to the fact that they have lower body weight and also absorb more quickly the levodopa medication. So also, in terms of my role and what I've done as an advocate, I set up a network called the Women's Parkinson's Project, which is basically about raising the needs of women with Parkinson's on the basis of many of us actually noticed that our symptoms were much worse around the times of our periods. And, no one was actually paying any attention to this. I know someone here is from ADHD. Ireland is the same with women with ADHD, and actually it's the same process in terms of dopamine affecting, So, we need this to be taken into account in terms of our care, that women are suffering with Parkinson's already, and then you've got the hormonal issue on top of it. No one is looking at this. And in terms of research, we need to have, sex as biological value taken into account. And in terms of, another part that I'm working as a dietitian is also, promoting the fact that nutrition is very individual for people with Parkinson's and needs to happen, at the diagnosis all the way through, whether you're young onset or later onset. And finally, in terms of, in terms of what we have to do in terms of the questions, neurology needs to be raised the platform to the same as cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Like, we are just not on the same trajectory in terms of funding for research, in terms of funding for therapies. And I think, collectively, everyone has to raise the voices, because you've got to remember, people with Parkinson's, up to 20% and possibly more are young onset or early onset, which is under the age of sort of 50. But there's a huge cohort, obviously, who are older, over 65. And a lot of them actually can't speak for themselves, literally, metaphorically, and physically. So we need, the Parkinson's associations, we need the researchers, we need the scientists, we need the companies, all to advocate for us. And I think the other thing was, in terms of a couple of things, was about, over-promising a cure. I actually, yeah, it'd be great if I had a cure, but I don't have any expectations. But what I do want is better treatments than what a drug that was developed 60 years ago for Parkinson's disease. I want someone to find a way to slow the disease, to improve my life and any other people living with a neurological condition. And that comes down to personalized medicine. And I would, say that we need people to listen and not just be a token in this process, but to be very much central to this discussion and moving it forward. That I've probably gone over my time, so.
Thanks, Rochelle. And actually, I've got a few more sort of, I suppose, quick fire questions that I want to put to the panel before we really open things up to the audience. And one of the things I kind of wanted to think about for the next section is really how we can use some of the current trends in healthcare to really advance personalized approaches in neurology. And obviously you can't have a meeting these days without talking about COVID. And I wanted to ask maybe some of the panelists whether they felt that COVID and the pandemic and the learnings from that are going to help us advance in this field, or have they put the brakes on approaches to personalized approaches to care? Maybe Professor Berger, question to you first.
Yeah, thank you. I think every crisis also harbors a chance, and so this was also with the pandemic. I think apart from, of course, the catastrophic and dramatic situations which we were faced around the globe, we also recognized, and whatever we have said before, that we are faced with a dramatic fragmentation of healthcare data. And this is on a nationwide situation, but also very clearly also on the European level. So the really forced reality check by the pandemic showed us that there is an enormously lack and gap of integrating data nationwide, but also Europe-wide. On the other hand, I think there was definitely an acceleration, because this, apart from the fact that physical distancing was promoted and needed everywhere, I think we also experienced a certain coming together, because immediately we moved on to virtual and digital monitoring. This was facilitated in many meanings. You know, our health authorities said in the past, this is not possible for legal, for administrative reasons, and suddenly it worked because it had to work. And so I think there was a lot of accelerating details, but also we were clearly faced with the obvious gap which we have to bridge to move on our health care in terms of personalization.
Mike, same question to you from the industry side. Do you think the pandemic has maybe accelerated moves towards PHC, or has it caused kind of barriers for you in your work?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? I would say, it has made a lot of things harder. The fact that we have to collaborate over all of these virtual calls to do things has not been easy, but I think people have found their way through it. And I've worked in the digital medicine space for a while now, and I would say prior to the pandemic, there were two groups of people. There were early adopters, and then there were a lot of people that said digital approaches are a distraction. And that second group doesn't really exist anymore, right? I would echo Dr. Berger in that telemedicine was very rapidly adopted, and not just telemedicine, but remote consultation, remote assessments, remote management, and digital therapeutics. All of these things came into place very, very fast. So I think it's created a need for more approaches, and even as we all hope the pandemic subsides, I think these hybrid models will still be in place. You'll have the best of face-to-face interactions augmented with the digital approaches to afford everybody a better experience. In the industry, that translates also into decentralized trials, how we think about setting up and running studies, much more emphasis placed on remote assessments. In our autism programs, we have things done at home in assessments, sleep maps, beacons, remote sensors that reduce the friction of the study, but also create higher resolution data and meaning for patients. And I think the pandemic shows what happens when people put their minds to something. You know, exactly as Professor Berger said, I mean, all of these things weren't there before. There were lots of reasons for it. The minute we needed them, it's actually, the collaboration between the healthcare system, patient associations, industry, everybody puts differences aside and solves a problem that needed solving quickly. And I think that's the biggest learning. We have to take that momentum out of the pandemic.
Rochelle, as a person living with a neurological disorder, would you agree with what you've heard about the impact COVID has had?
Well, I suppose I'm coming from a patient perspective, which is different. And I think on one hand, what was great is it accelerated, remote care, because you couldn't get to talk to a consultant on the phone or, on Zoom. And, we couldn't do that. Technology, like in Ireland, we've like 46 different computer systems. We couldn't do that. COVID happened, and all of a sudden they were able to do it. So, it did drive suddenly that motivator, collective motivator, to actually be able to do things that people, hid behind, excuses not to be able to do. And this is the other thing is for people with Parkinson's, and I'm sure other neurological conditions, it spawned basically online exercise. So there's lots of groups, you know, and a lot of older people with Parkinson's who normally would not be technology savvy. You know, I'm a member of the Dublin Parkinson's branch of the Parkinson's Association of Ireland, and I basically helped older people through the phone, talking to their sons or daughters to get them online to be able to do an exercise class. So, and that was really important because we know with the research that the isolation of COVID had a really damaging effect on the progression of Parkinson's for many people. So I suppose that was the negative side of COVID, is it definitely had an impact there in terms of worsening symptoms. And I suppose, you know, the other thing then is like, I think someone else mentioned it, like all these health apps, and, you know, we're seeing all these sort of, you know, Apple has come out with but we, as the person with Parkinson's, I haven't seen any of it, you know, it hasn't arrived on my doorstep to help monitor me. You know, so there's all these people spending lots of money, and we, the people with the conditions, are not actually benefiting. And when are we going to benefit from it? You know, that's my question. And, you know, the other thing is, say, for example, in Parkinson's, they use at the moment, you know, when you go to see your neurologist, there's a thing called the UPGRS, and they do this kind of test where you have to tap your fingers and touch your nose, and it's not sensitive enough to pick up, you know, our symptoms, particularly in the earlier onset Parkinson's disease. And we need the community to come together to find better ways to, you know, to be able to, you know, assess ourselves. And like, I know myself as someone with Parkinson's, I notice differences, and yet my neurologist saying, oh, you're absolutely fine. I can feel it, but it's not picked up by me touching my nose because I'm pretty early on, you know, but it doesn't mean that I'm not interested in trying to keep myself from progressing, you know. So I just think, yes, COVID has moved us on, but there's a lot more to do, I suppose. And look, it's very exciting that everyone is interested in it and is wanting to take it forward. So, but I really think, again, you need to talk to the people with the conditions from, you know, cradle to grave in terms of the process, whatever you're developing, because it's wasted money otherwise, if you ask me, if you don't.
Absolutely. And I think what all three of you are saying is that, you know, COVID has really sort of accelerated this sort of digital transformation, but it's not been accelerated quickly enough. And even if it has, maybe some of the outputs of that are not really sort of accessible to those living with the conditions as yet. And on that, Shibi, maybe I can bring you back into the conversation here. You know, you're working in the digital health sciences side of things. How can that really drive PHC, and how can we overcome maybe some of the barriers that Rochelle and the other panelists have spoken about?
I think we have to bear in mind what we usually refer to when we call about digital transformation is just an instrument among many others to enhance the probability to go after personalized medicine development. I think the true transformation that we need is not about only digitalizing the measurements, it's about transforming the research question. You heard Rochelle, her Parkinson's disease is unique. So the new generation of research question will have to be about developing methodologies that will be able to properly recognize the unique pattern of a given disease in an individual. That's taking efforts that are about going the high road. For instance, at Biogen, it took us like 6 years to generate what we call the longitudinal deep phenotyping dataset in multiple sclerosis, combining every single rich dimension that could make us understand disease heterogeneity at the subject level, switching from a population-based objective to actually unlocking the code of what's heterogeneity about. It is only if you get there that you can understand causality of disease, which is probably not the same in each individual in terms of what is defining the unique disease course that every single person living with the disease is experiencing. So transforming the research question using digitalization as an instrument to enhance the resolution for clinical measurement, but more importantly, to some extent also for imaging. We have to bear in mind when it's about the brain, the closer you can get to the truth is the image of the brain. And we suffer in neurology from the complexity there. You know, there's nothing more complex than the brain spatially. So not ignoring also that every single disease has a pattern in terms of the spatial distribution, which is unique to each individual, is probably a necessary condition. So collecting the right data for sufficiently long with high resolution in large cohort is only a starting point to probably one day understand how to better develop drug that will act on infinitely heterogeneous pattern of longitudinal course.
Thank you, Shibi. Before we leave this sort of digital transformation conversation and move in a different direction, Marcelo, I wanted to bring you back in because there's a question in the chat as well around, you know, the use of this data, privacy concerns, ethical concerns, who owns the data, who has access to it. Should we be concerned about the digital transformation of healthcare? And, you know, where are the guardrails as we move forward in precision medicine and personalized healthcare approaches?
We should be concerned, but we should be enthusiastic about it as well. So digital transformation of health opens great opportunities, as we just heard from Mr. Berger, but also new challenges, as you just pointed out. And now the fundamental catalyzer and currency of this digital transformation is data. And there is no doubt that data is essential. We cannot, for science and for healthcare, we cannot cure what we cannot measure. So we need to facilitate data availability and sharing and processing, including automated processing, in order to advance science and develop more calibrated solutions for end users. But as you just said, this digitalization also opens new ethical challenges. Data, especially when they're processed automatically, they are subject to biases. And depending on the way we curate our data sets, we could introduce human bias into the data sets that can be amplified by the algorithm. And this can lead potentially to discrimination. And there are reports where algorithms that process biased data sets can actually discriminate people based on certain phenotypic traits or whatever is the origin of the bias. And this is a big risk because it could undermine the principle of universality and solidarity in healthcare. Privacy is another major concern. The more data we have, the more information we can process from it. And it's very important to process data in order to generate new scientific knowledge, but we could also generate ancillary information that is privacy sensitive, and that therefore, if it falls in the wrong hands, can be extremely detrimental to the end user, to the person or the patient. So in my view, the major way to prevent these risks without but still in a way that maximizes the benefits of this technological transformation is to really put patient autonomy and personal autonomy at the center. So people should have the ability and right to make free and competent decisions about the data they want to share and the data they want to seclude. And they should have an adequate understanding of what their data are used for. So for which purposes and which, and this purpose should not focus only on the immediate purpose for which the data are collected, but also for nearly endless reuses of data that keep occurring in the digital ecosystem.
Thanks, Marcelo. I want to maybe stay on this topic of data for a second, but maybe look at it from a slightly broader angle as well, because going back to Maria Teresa's presentation at the start, she was talking about the fact that we need to see more patient narratives, more patient-reported outcome measures being included in policy-making and decision-making, and ensuring that everything happened is really sort of with the person in mind. Juan Carlos, I want to come back to you as a payer working in a HTA agency. Do you feel you have the tools to be able to take all of this data that's being generated in different formats and in different ways and actually use it to influence the decisions you're making around sort of cost benefit to society?
Well, I think first of all, it is important to remark that taking the patient perspective appropriately into account should be a key feature in any strong HTA system, and not uniquely in personalized medicine or these developments, but in every disease area, regardless of whether these approaches are used or not. Now, having said that, it's also obvious that different HTA systems are better or worse, are at different stages of development in terms of to what extent and how they integrate the patient perspective in their processes. Before I started working on my current role in September 2019, I used to work for NICE, and they were doing very interesting work that has already been published in collaboration with Myeloma UK, a patient association, on a research project to test various methods of surveying patient preferences, aiming to understand more about the way the patient preference data can be collected and used in decisions about new medicines and new treatments, right? So that, I think that type of work is obviously key in this field, but also when we talk about the payer perspective, we usually think about health technology assessment. So the individual technology, how we assess it, how we take into account the cost-benefit ratio to decide whether we fund it or not. But I think here it is also key guideline development. So when we have a patient with a particular condition, they will be taking different medicines, but they will also be diagnosed, tested with different diagnostic tests, which many of which will use genomics data. They will be using wearables. Some of them will have been assessed by a health technology assessment body. The same thing applies to the medicine. The same thing applies to the diagnostic. So all of that needs to be taken together and sort of made sense of in service design and guideline development, in the development of guidelines rather than in the health technology assessment. But also there are other processes that have been tested recently, again, by NICE as part of this sort of patient preferences project. They looked into applying the scientific advice route to support organizations interested in performing patient preference studies that could be taken into account in guideline development or in health technology assessments. And so for those not familiarized with the scientific advice route, traditionally it has been used to advise companies developing health technologies to give them the keys in terms of what evidence they need to develop, at what stage of development, to be able to build value dossiers that are not thrown back because they are not presenting the right evidence, right? So the same can be applied to organizations trying to develop patient preference studies now. And last but not least, I think the development of new technologies, digital biomarkers, as we said before, I think will be a key development in this area, because so far we've been talking about the use of patient preferences and how we take them into account in the different processes that HTA bodies do, health technology assessment, but also guideline development. But I think these technologies might be quite useful to also see the revealed preferences of patients, the revealed relationship with the technologies, uptake of medicines, and those sorts of evidence that are very useful for both health technology assessment and guideline development.
And Peggy, can I bring you in on this question as well? Because obviously you're doing a lot of work in the health outcomes space. Do you think that we are collecting the right data? And do you think we have the tools in place to be able to quantify that in a way that we can assess whether these health outcomes are being met in a meaningful way?
Good question. I guess there is not like the standard digital biomarker tool which enables us to measure the outcomes for everything and every purpose in a way. It really depends on the specific question we ask and how can we answer then what the outcomes are. And obviously in terms of outcomes, it is very important that the difference is noticed at the level of the people with the disease, so that they feel the difference. So that then we have to ask them. That's the patient-reported outcomes. But I mean, there's so many other things we can do around that in preparation to get there. So I would like to share an example. I'm currently co-leading a work group at HTAI, the Health Technology Assessment Association, on the question whether the analysis of patient communication in social media could help to inform health technology assessment agencies to better understand what the experiences of these specific patients are, how they communicate about their diseases, and what we can learn about the needs. So this could inform also like the research into like what are their preferences and what kind of technologies, health technologies or therapies could be used to address their needs. The interesting observation in this project is that everybody thinks this might be a really useful source of information to try in a non-influential way to get this information in a fairly representative manner, let's say, but that we are not there yet. We don't have the methods which are robust enough to do this. And so we need to learn how to do this better if we really want to get something out of that which is useful for future decision making. So I guess that is true for many of these instruments we are using to measure outcomes, because especially with patient-reported outcomes measures, it is something built on the current situation and the current experience, but this changes over time with new therapies coming in. And so we need to adapt these outcomes measures and keep learning what is important to the patients with the advancing healthcare technologies available to them. Sorry
Absolutely.
for making it more complicated.
No, I don't think it can get much more complicated, but definitely I think one of the things we're hearing from everybody is the need to really understand what matters most to the people living with these diseases, so that we can frame the research questions and we can really start to target the unmet needs that we're seeing in the community. And actually what's interesting is in the e-learning modules that we've created, there is one that looks at what we're calling patient engagement in PHC, personalized healthcare. And there's a really nice quote in it from a US-based advocate called Erin Moore, and she says, I hate the term patient engagement because no one is more engaged or involved than the patient. And I wonder if the onus needs to be on other stakeholders to really open up to collaboration and involving the people living with the disorders in their day-to-day work. Thomas, from the sort of neurologist's perspective, do you think, there could be more work done to sort of strengthen the relationship between the doctors and the people that they treat?
Yeah, I think this is without any doubts a matter of improvement. In the context of personalized healthcare, I think we should also adhere to one of the fundamental, I think, topics in a relationship, which means confidence. And if I'm not confident with my patient or people with a disease, or with my sick fund general director, or whomever, even with my best friend, then it will not work, this relationship. So confidence is important. And I think we also, as a kind of representatives of a system, in this the academic system, the neurological system, we also have to create the fundaments. And we heard a lot about this, but I think I have 3 levels of fundaments which we need to create. The one is responsibility, because engagement in whomever is engaged also has a responsibility. And one of the major questions is, and this again also links to privacy and transparency, is how much are we willing to share our personal owned data? And this means from an individual, which means, do I share my genetic information? Do I share my biosensor collected, accumulated data? But it also from the other end, does a sick fund shares the data of their people? And so this is the one issue. And the other issue is, and Maria Teresa already mentioned this, democracy. The democratic development and improvement by personalized healthcare is, I think, highly important, because democratic means, of course, not from a philosophical way, but from a, let's say, data sharing perspective, is that we are all on the same level. However, I think we have to definitely ensure that solidarity in the health system from an individual to the system is continued, and that we are not creating a new form of discrimination. Because if I have a very bad profile, my sick fund would probably tell me you won't get any treatment anymore because you're unfortunately, but definitely on a bad road, or they enhance my my payments. So these are already examples which exist. So I think these 3 points: responsibility, transparency, including the question of ownership and privacy, and also the democratic pathway should be ensured to further develop this, this goal, as we heard.
Thank you, Professor Berger. Marcelo, maybe I'll bring you in on that point as well, because Professor Berger is talking a lot about sort of responsibility. Where does the responsibility lie here from an ethical perspective to ensure that we're building out healthcare systems with people in mind?
Well, the responsibility, I would argue, is shared. As we heard multiple times during this conversation, it's very unlikely that due to the complexity of the issues we're dealing with, one-size-fits-all approach will be effective. So we need to address these challenges through what we call a multi-level governance, which involves various levels, certainly some degree of self-regulation by healthcare institutions and industry is desirable. For example, this is the approach that the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, is pursuing with their recommendations on responsible innovation in neurotechnology. But we also need to focus on awareness raising campaigns, because I think one important way to define engagement in this current digital era is as empowerment. Because the problem usually with people with neurological conditions is not that they don't want to be engaged, and therefore we need to ensure engagement, but it's actually that they do not, that they do have, they do want to share their views and needs, but we're not offering adequate platforms to enable that in most cases. So empowerment would also mean establishing platforms for mutual exchange, and in the field of digital transformation and neurotechnology development, those platforms should take the shape of user-centered design platforms where the views and needs of the end users are put at the center of the development process. And then finally, governance bodies can play a role. This is something that both national governments and international organizations are pursuing. But this, I think, top-down approach can only work if we develop viable strategies also from the bottom up.
Thanks, Marcelo. And, you know, we often talk about as well ensuring that people living with the conditions in question are also involved in any of these governance platforms. And I think it's important that we empower and equip people to be able to fulfill those roles. On that note, I'll maybe come to Mike and Shibi now for an industry perspective on this, because Marcelo did mention there is an onus on the industry to ensure that they are doing a better job of addressing and I suppose eliciting unmet needs of the patients and making sure the R&D moves in that direction. Maybe Mike first, do you want to comment on that one? How can we better collaborate?
Yeah, so I mean, patient engagement is one of those terms that the industry is guilty of using all the time, right? And I completely agree with Erin. It's not about patient engagement, it's about people. It was said in the chat, I think, we're all patients at some point. And it's actually just about empathy. And can we do a better job? I think Rochelle said from cradle to grave, right? Can we do a better job of involving people in the design process? Absolutely. They need to be involved in the design of the solutions. They need to be involved in the design of the output of these solutions, the measurements themselves. Are they even concepts that are important to the people who live with these diseases? And they have to be involved in how those data are then used. And at the heart of all of these solutions actually is data, generally with precision medicine. And what we're talking about is the context of how those data are used across multiple stakeholders. So people with diseases can't manage their world in isolation. Yes, they will certainly try, but they can't do it alone. You have to bring all of the stakeholders involved in care or the situation together and explore how these interventions are used, how the data is used, and find a situation that works for everybody involved. It has to work for the network, otherwise it won't work at all. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a very long way to go, but the intent is there. And the comment has come up so many times, let's retire the use of the word patient. That's absolutely right. So it's about people.
Thanks, Mike. Shibi, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, probably seconding everything Mike said. There are no better advocates to our efforts than the people experiencing daily life with the disease, which I think we need to take to the next level in the coming years to go together toward regulators to actually create a path to transform the endpoint, because I think we're doing a much better job collecting the right data, richer data, on every single individual in trial. We currently are struggling, however, because there still is not yet a path to transform and to personalize the endpoints and the outcome. We're living in a world where randomized controlled trials are supposedly telling the truth since 70 years, which technically means we develop medicine based on population-based evidence. If we want to change that, we have to create a path where the endpoint for a disease in a given person is going to be unique. And we now have methodological approaches that are enabling us to compare the baseline of a self to herself or himself longitudinally. Currently, however, regulators are still asking us, and that is a conundrum, for a one-size-fits-all type of outcome in every given trial. Changing that is key to actually unlock how we will develop drugs that will be evaluated based on their efficacy at the subject level, which is, I think, what we're struggling for currently. That dialogue can only be enabled if, with people living with those diseases, we talk one voice when we engage with regulators and policymakers.
Rochelle, I want to bring you back in at this point, because I see there's an interesting discussion going on in the chat in which you've been involved, which is talking about sort of the relationship between those living with whatever disorder it might be and their healthcare professionals. A lot of care, is driven by the specialist, and people are maybe seeing their specialist once or twice a year for a couple of minutes. And it really isn't the sort of infrastructure that needs to be in place to really enable shared decision-making, personalized healthcare, and so on. And there's a lot of people commenting saying, we need to see multidisciplinary care teams, we need to see a stronger role for specialist nurses, we need to really sort of build out these relationships. Do you want to comment on that, maybe looking beyond the theory that we're talking about to what actually happens on the ground in practice and how that could be improved?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that I noticed here that, and no disrespect, but it's quite high level, technical, theory, governance, etc. But, really, I suppose, just listening to people's comments, those who are living with neurological conditions, it's getting the basics right. So personalized medicine, can be, an app, but really that app's not going to matter much if my medication is not being properly managed because I can't get to see a neurologist, which is the case in Ireland. Many people can't get access. So it's kind of like the cart before the horse. We've got to get the foundations right. It's a bit like people coming to me as a dietitian and they're taking all these supplements, and then I look at their diet and they haven't got their basics right. There's no point in taking supplements if you can't get the foundations right. So, I think there's, just listening to the chat, there's a lot of frustration, and I know it's, recognize some of my PD advocate friends there, quite active, but I'm sure they're speaking for other conditions. There was another condition that said they don't even get to see someone once a year. So back to the professor's comment, you're not going to build a trust or relationship. So why would I give you my information when you won't even see me to treat my condition, you know, and I can't get access to you, and you won't give me access to Duodopa medication that I should have much earlier in my process to help my quality of life, you know. So it is a little bit, you know, I think we need to bring it down to getting, I mean, the DBS is mentioned there, and, you know, it is a life changer for many people with Parkinson's, but actually it has significant impact on people post DBS. And there really is a huge role for tech people to be involved in that. The neurologists, that's not their expertise. It's the tech person's expertise, it's the programmer's expertise, but it's bringing them and the person with Parkinson's and the healthcare together to actually say, well, how can we improve that? Because it could really make a huge difference for many people with Parkinson's. But, you know, so it's kind of looking at what we've got already and saying, how can we improve what we've got, rather than sort of, you know, saying, well, let's do all these apps that really, you know, the reality is with people with Parkinson's, you know, they might have memory issues, so they're not going to remember to do the app. So how much use is it to them? But maybe something that actually helps them to remember, take the tablet. And for an older person, having an iPhone watch probably is not going to work. So, you know, we need to think differently. And it comes back to actually the individual patients with their individual, or people with the condition, you know, with their individual needs, and sitting down and, you know, thrashing that out, rather than the so-called experts, you know, deciding for us. We are the experts in our condition. Ask the expert. Ask us why we're not getting involved. Ask us why, what the barriers are. You know, that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Rochelle. And we will be asking everybody what the barriers are in a few minutes, because we've got some polling questions that we want to put to the audience as well. I see we have a question from the audience, and then I see Juan Carlos, you also wanted to come back into the discussion. So Noel, if you want to take the floor, please do so. You're on.
Sorry, folks.
Noel. Yeah, there you go.
Well, I'll just turn on my camera as well, shouldn't I? Good morning, folks. Sorry for I got to you late, I think. Oh, nice one.
There you are.
Yeah, I suppose my view on all of this is that, like a lot of my fellow beneficiaries of this wonderful condition we have, I have hidden away myself from the condition until the point where I knew I'd get the DBS, which I got done in London over the summer. And at that stage, I realized that by shoving my head in the sand hasn't been good for me in the last 10 years. And I think we need a major change in the whole process of addressing conditions, educating people very early on. That multidisciplinary approach that Rochelle and others are advocating needs to happen at the very early stage in the process, almost a week or two or a year, within the year of your diagnosis, where you get assessed and you go into a constant monitoring program. So if you're not taking your tablets on time, people know. If you're not doing the exercise, people know. They can advise you accordingly, and they can intervene. And the technology is out there. It's been there for 20 years, the kind of monitoring technology we have. And there are lots of companies making a very good living in this area. So it's getting back into that process very early, back into the stage of the conditions where people, I didn't want to know. My consultant told me I get to 65, happy days. That was his consolation when I left. I said, that's wonderful, pal. I'll come back to you at 65 and shove it down your throat, which is basically what I will be doing next year. But without the benefits of private healthcare, I wouldn't be here today. Wouldn't be having this conversation at all. Anyway, that's enough of my rant. I think.
Thank you, Noel. And I think you raised really important points here. That, you know, we have to get the basics right. We have to intervene early, and we have to intervene effectively. And talking sort of a little bit pie in the sky sometimes, I think we forget about the reality of people on the ground today, and there's definitely a lot that needs to be done in that sense. Juan Carlos, you wanted to come back in.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, first there are 2 points I wanted to raise. One is sort of in reaction to something Rochelle said, which I think is very relevant, and it's a terminology that is already being used in health technology assessment. It's a lot of the agencies organize their activities both in health technology assessment and guideline development around committees, and they not too long ago started to refer to those living with the condition as experts or living of experience of living with that condition when they incorporate that input in committees along with the input of expert nurses, experts, specialist doctors in those disease areas. So that's important to see that them as what they are, which is experts of people of living with that condition, and the preferences and the views of what it is like to receive care in that condition and live with that condition. And the second point I wanted to raise is perhaps a bit controversial, but if we attend different sessions around different disease areas, a lot of the concerns that are being raised here today will be raised there too, which is we need to see our doctors more frequently, and and they are fair points. But if everybody got to see their doctors more frequently, perhaps we wouldn't be able to afford that. So I think one aspect of personalized medicine that is very useful in surmounting that potential hurdle is that some interventions are well, every intervention that needs to get into the system needs to displace something else, right? So if you're funding a specific medicine, something else will get displaced from elsewhere in the system. So to base in one example of something that was mentioned today, for example, imagine we have a group of people living with one specific condition that get to see their doctors once every 6 months, for example, and the specifics, please ignore them because I'm making them up as I talk. So, and then because of some of the technologies we are using around precision medicine, personalized healthcare, we find out that actually men evolve more slowly than women, and some clinical trials around that condition show that actually men will maintain the same health outcomes seeing their doctors once every 9 months, whilst women actually do benefit a lot from seeing their doctors once every 4 months, for example, every 3 months. The overall cost is the same, the outcomes are better. That's the kind of value proposition that makes interventions much more easily adoptable. It is also true that an intervention might improve the overall health outcome so much that it justifies an extra cost. But also we need to be mindful that that actual decision of introducing that specific type of condition, or sorry, of technology, service, whatever it is, will display something else in the system that is less efficient. That is a less efficient investment of resources in healthcare. But it is a fair decision to make, but it's just something that we all need to be mindful.
Absolutely, Juan Carlos. I think the challenge in this space is that, a lot of the costs associated with neurological disorders are indirect costs, and they can be hard to quantify in the same way as direct healthcare costs. And we've been advocating for a long time that payers, take a more, I suppose, creative approach to looking at that cost-benefit equation, because there's definitely, I think, an investment case to be made in precision medicine, but it's probably going to have to be based on a lot of sort of indirect and maybe longer term outcomes than we see in other disease areas where it's very obvious that there's a cure and it works. I think for chronic diseases, it is a little bit more difficult. I realize we're running out of time very, very quickly. And what I want to do is do a quick couple of polls, and I'll bring the panelists back in again for final comments. So don't worry, I'll come back to you. And then we want to spend maybe about 10 minutes just introducing you to the e-learning platform that we've created and presenting some of the resources that we have available on this particular topic. But I want to launch the first poll, and I would ask the panelists to feel free to answer these questions as well. And you should hopefully see on your screen the first question, which is around what would you like precision medicine or personalized healthcare to deliver? Now, you should probably be able to pick more than one, but I would suggest that you just pick the answer that you think is the most important. If you need to pick two, feel free. But really, is it around, better research into the underlying mechanisms of disease, so we understand these disorders of the brain that so far have eluded us? Is it about developing more targeted and tailored therapies, so better medicines that are really tailored for you and your profile, or maybe also targeting specific symptoms that really you feel are most problematic? Is it about innovative new approaches to care? Is it more about improvement in overall disease management? Do you think it's around, building up an evidence base which will enable shared decision making so that you and your doctor have a better sense of what will work, what won't, and what you want to see as part of your care? Or is it about, saving money, less costly care for you, but also maybe for society at large? Or is it other things? And if it's other things, I would ask you maybe to type those other things into the chat so we have a real sense of where people think that we should be looking when it comes to personalized healthcare. So I'll let it run for a few more minutes because I see people are still participating. And really what we want to do with these questions is to get a quick snapshot of your views, and that will enable us to sort of plan our work in this sphere into next year and beyond, so we can really see as a European patient organization, where we should be focusing and what we can do to advance work in this space. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling now, and you should be able to see the results on your screen. And as you can see, 46%, so nearly half of those who responded have chosen an improvement in disease management as the main desire or the main goal of personalized healthcare. After that comes developing more targeted and tailored therapies. That's 43%. As you can see, this adds up to way over 100% because people obviously picked more than one, but it's interesting to see the approach. And improve evidence base for shared decision making is also quite high up there. So I think everything is looking important. Less costly care, maybe not so important. So I guess what the message is, if it works, it's worth paying for. And that's obviously something we need to bear in mind. Okay, so that's an interesting result. So let's maybe move on to the next poll. And the next one that we've got here, if I can pull it up. Let's stop sharing that one. Is around the barriers. So you can see here, what do you think the biggest barrier to personalized healthcare is? And I think here it's a single choice question, so you can only pick one. Is it that we don't have enough knowledge of the brain? Is it that there's a lack of political will, so the government isn't prepared to invest in this new approach? Is it that it's too expensive, so we're developing sort of niche treatments perhaps that we just can't afford to pay for, or we won't pay for? It's too commercially driven perhaps, so our company is really hopping on this bandwagon because they see it as an opportunity to make money. Is it around unwillingness to share data or distrust, that maybe we as people feel that our data may be used in the wrong way? Is it a lack of meaningful patient engagement? So, we're not being asked what really matters most. And, unless that happens, obviously, we can't have person-centered care. Is it because our healthcare systems are too inflexible? So, as much as we would like this to become a reality, the way that things are set up at the minute doesn't allow that. If you've got your box on the smaller size, you'll need to scroll down to see the other options. And these are time constraints and complexity in clinical practice. This has come up. You see your doctor for 15 minutes twice a year. Is that the problem? Or is it poor health literacy that, people affected by these diseases maybe don't know what's out there, what can be done? And maybe it's also on the side of the healthcare professionals that maybe they're not upskilled enough to be able to use and implement these new approaches. And again, other is an option here. So other thoughts, please feel free to put those in the chat. And we'll let this run for a couple of more minutes. Okay, so we still got some results coming in. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now, and I will share the results. And you should be able to see here that with 23%, the top answer chosen was that healthcare systems are actually too inflexible, and we need to see a little bit more flexibility and agility in our healthcare systems. And up at the top, not enough knowledge about the brain was also selected. And I think that really shows that we as patient organizations should be advocating for more basic research into underlying mechanisms of diseases, as well as clinical research into potential new treatments and ultimately cures. So that's also an interesting result. And then the last question I wanted to ask is around next steps. What should we do next as a community of stakeholders? Should we be looking to extend and to run more training and capacity building on personalised healthcare? Should we be actually raising awareness and generating patient narratives on the impact of personalised healthcare? So saying, I am a person living with, and personalised healthcare will help me achieve X, Y, Z. So we're really sort of getting the message out there that this works and this needs to happen. Should we be working on policy and advocacy events and activities? So should we be going out talking to governments and saying, listen, we need to change the way we do things? Obviously, COVID is a good opportunity on which we can sort of go to governments and say, we're building back better. I know that's jargon at this point, but how can we improve our healthcare service delivery? Do we need to maybe build up a community of advocates who can work on this topic, who can be vocal, who can be ambassadors for personalised healthcare? There's an option here around growing partnerships and positioning neurology centrally in external activities. And what we mean by that is there are other people working on this already. And maybe it's about us going to their tables and speaking up for neurology, as opposed to running a lot of these initiatives ourselves. Should we be looking to co-create pathways for clinicians and patients to work together to support the implementation of personalised healthcare? So maybe looking at more tools for shared decision-making, maybe looking at how we can improve that kind of ecosystem of care delivery with the person at the centre. And of course, if you've got other ideas, feel free to put them in the chat or to send them to us afterwards. And again, we'll let this run for a couple more minutes. Okay, so looking at the results here, 38% have chosen co-creating pathways for clinicians and patients to support implementation of personalised healthcare. So Professor Berger, I think maybe some work for us to do as EFNA and EAN to maybe start to look at how we can partner more closely on this particular topic. But there's definitely a lot of food for thought here, and about 20% coming back to say we need to do more policy advocacy, outreach and events on this particular topic as well. So really interesting results. I'm going to go back to the panel really quickly, just 30 seconds from each of you on a quick summation of what you've seen here and your views on what we should do next. And then Elizabeth, I'll hand over to you to introduce us to the e-learning platform before we wrap up. So maybe Rochelle, we'll start with you this time.
Hi there, it's just reading the results there. Yeah, I think it was kind of quite interesting there that, using patient advocates was very low on the list of responses. And I think it would be interesting if this poll was split between people living with neurological conditions and others, because, you need to have the person with the condition at the central point. I suppose the other one in terms of designing was higher, so that's good. But yeah, I suppose, I just kind of really feel, as people living with condition, we also have a role to play in terms of being engaged with it. But I think we need, the neurological associations, we need the healthcare providers, we need the pharmaceutical companies to actually support, people with neurological conditions to come forward to, help them. And I mentioned there about the PD Avengers. We set it up because we were so frustrated that there was no voice there for people with Parkinson's. It's like the IMALS campaign. It's like the ADHD lady who's on today as well. We need to support, because we are living with this condition and trying to advocate. Like, it's quite a difficult thing to do, especially if people have, worse symptoms. So we need to support people to actually be able to engage. And I think, also what's very important is that people are compensated, that there is somehow, whether it's in advocacy or getting people involved in research, you need to incentivize people. Everyone else who's involved in it is in a paid job. So why are they people with conditions not, seen in the same level? I think that's an important thing as well. I think we need to bring personalized medicine to the people. So we know, in terms of, just to kind of give you a bit of background, and I shared the YouTube presentation I did on women with Parkinson's, but it's known that women get diagnosed later than men, and that also non-white people with Parkinson's, both women and that cohort, basically don't get access to neurologists. So if research is happening through a neurological center, it means by default a lot of people with Parkinson's are not going to get access to that research because of the disparity in being referred in. So and I suppose the other thing I just wanted to say with regard to Juan's kind of comment with regard to, you know, it's going to be expensive to give people what they need in terms of the proper care, which is really what we should be getting, is multidisciplinary care. And I suppose I just kind of feel, you know, cancer care is a great example of how that really has started to focus on personalized, and why can't we model ourselves, and why do we have to reinvent wheels, is one thing. But also on the other point, in terms of technology, I do think he's right that it could improve our care, because, you know, no one wants to be going in and out, you know, whether you're a young person trying to, you know, just work, or you're an older person who has problems with mobility, you know, you prefer to stay at home. So if it can be tracked and improved for everybody, you know, the monitoring to be able to improve your medication based on the monitoring, well, that's, you know, win-win. So we need to move, you know, faster to that outcome than we currently are. So yeah, so I suppose I really feel, you know, even, you know, in terms of the fantastic videos that were done, what's missing is the person with a neurological condition there. And I'm not just talking as someone with Parkinson's. I live with family members who suffer with ADHD as well. And there's the same problems going on there. It's a very medicalized approach, and the, you know, the personalized side is been left out of the conversation. So anyway, that's my piece.
Thanks, Rochelle. And I think that's definitely something that can be looked at moving forward, is really grounding all of this work in the real lived experience, and explaining and putting a context around why this is important and what needs to happen. So absolutely understood. I'll quickly go down the line to everybody else, and then I'll ask Yoka maybe to give some final thoughts as EFNA president before we play the short video about the e-learning platform. So Shibi, you're next on my screen, so I'll come to you for your 30 seconds of commentary.
I'll try to stick to 30 seconds. I strongly think that we talked about a lot of things: personalized disease measurement, disease management, disease understanding, and therapy development are 4 different equally important areas to push together. And we need all stakeholders. But I also heard 2 words today: importantly, relationship, and how can this transformation enhance and improve relationship, and empowerment. And it's probably about moving the center of gravity of this empowerment towards the people living with those neurological conditions. And I strongly believe in this respect that indeed, to answer Richelle, we need to make those self-monitoring tools available to people so that it can become secondarily an instrument of transforming care. And it's not about seeing their neurologist 1 or 2 a year. It's about seeing the neurologist when they think that they have the data to justify that a discussion is needed. And that transformation is what we have to drive together.
Thank you, Shibi. Mike.
Yeah, I was reflecting on the discussion around prioritization innovation versus getting the fundamentals in place to drive PHC. And I think where we need to get to is getting people on the best possible therapy as quickly as possible, whatever that looks like, right? And there are 2 problems with that. We can't really define the best possible therapy because outcomes aren't clear in many neurological disorders. And I think PHC has a role to play in defining outcomes that matter for individuals. And then the second, once you understand where you want to get to, at the minute, we have no idea of where the major value and outcomes drivers are in healthcare delivery. So we have to have a way of sharing data, data interoperability and standards. PHC is not about apps, but it is about insights, right? And it is about data. And we have to get this fundamental infrastructure in place if we want to be able to make the arguments that are easier to make in oncology, where outcomes are definitely clearer, as is the opportunity for precision targeting, right? So yeah, I would just say that there is a fundamental piece in data architecture sharing and interoperability across all stakeholders, including pharma, that has to be there if we want to be able to move forwards.
Thanks, Mike. Anka Peggy.
Yeah, I think that as a society, we should have really a strong interest in making personalized healthcare like the new normal. To be able to do that, in my opinion, we need more sustainability, and that means that everybody has to notice the difference it makes. It cannot be just like for a few people, like Rochelle said, when will I be benefiting from it? People need to feel the difference it makes on all levels. And if we only focus on technology, statistics, biochemistry, and business models, we lose the patients. If we only listen to the patients, we may lose the science and the evidence behind it. So I think the trick here really is to have a more integrated approach to personalized healthcare. Is like increasing the understanding of the science, the applicability in the specific context and the clinical setting, and then bridging to the patient's experiences and needs.
Thank you, Inka. Juan Carlos.
Well, I think we've heard a lot today about what personalized healthcare looks like, and really, I think this was part of some previous discussions as well. It's really just how the medicine of the future will look like, and that's what we're trying to shape here, I guess. It's about a lot of different data sources. Some of them are quite new in healthcare and come from quite innovative technologies. But a lot of that is around, as Mike said previously, around being able to integrate that data, make sense of it, help doctors and patients make decisions that are the best for them. And until we have those data in a way that they can talk to each other, it will be very difficult. That interoperability of data is basic, but just patient records in a way that they can be used by doctors and by patients, and they sort of carry their data wherever they go, and they don't have to repeat the same story over and over again. Those are developments that sound quite basic, but that will be key to healthcare, to personalized healthcare. But I think when we think about how we will get there, we also need to be thinking that healthcare is a field where the percentage of what we spend as countries is growing, and we need to be thinking as well about technologies that are good and that will make it into the system are also technologies that will show a very strong value proposition. They will show very strong benefits, and some of them will be deserving of just increasing the cost in that front, but some other will base their propositions in that they will be making the delivery of that healthcare more efficient, for example, in one way or another. So I think for this to be feasible, it also needs to be sustainable, and good personalized healthcare will be sustainable healthcare as well.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Marcelo, your thoughts, please.
Probably my concluding thought is that personalized health is here to stay, and most likely within a few years, when we'll refer to healthcare, we will always refer to personalized healthcare. But in order to embrace this revolution in a manner that is sustainable and is empowering all stakeholders involved, we should go beyond this false dichotomy that has been created sometimes based on this misconception that we can either accelerate scientific and technological innovation in this field or protect people's rights. I would argue, and one argument that we're trying to advance in the ethics community, and that is also emerging out of the many user-centered design studies that we've done with end users, is that this is a false dichotomy, that we can really protect people's rights in such as privacy and personal autonomy and so on, and thereby accelerate, and in this way accelerate scientific and technological innovation, because we are all more willing to share our data if we perceive the data processors as trustworthy entities, and we can exercise control over the data we generate. So if we can go beyond that, I think we will navigate this transition on a very solid ground.
Thank you, Marcelo. So, and the last word to you, Professor Berger.
Yeah, I think I have learned a lot of the different views I heard today. I think there is one very pragmatic approach. The first one for me is the bottle, the ghost is out of the bottle. So whether we care on a more theoretical or more pragmatic level, it anyhow is on the way to happen. So the data are generated, the data will be used. The question will be who uses which data. And to be honest, I think it must be in a kind of altruistic way. And I recognize and acknowledge, of course, all the activities from industry, but also from public organizations, but they might have a different agenda than a patient or a, sorry to say that, or having used the term, a person with a disease, with a neurological disease, might have another agenda on that. So I think this is one of it happens anyway, and it's now our care and duty to bring this in the correct directions. And the second point is, there are a lot of gaps, as we heard also especially from Richelle, across even the European community with different services and possibilities, capabilities. So I don't think that we can solve all problems at the same time, but we could probably identify which fundamental gaps on this road, on this joint effort, are here and there, and probably substantiate and support those in various ways, instead of having, you know, a kind of overarching approach, which might not be able to be fulfilled by various different stakeholders, be it the patient or up to the other end, a healthcare system.
Thank you very much, Professor Berger. So at this point, I want to thank all of the panelists for their participation today. I think it's been a really diverse and interesting discussion, and it really has provided us, I think, with some real food for thought in terms of how we as a European patient organization and how many of our audience today will be able to engage further in this particular dialogue and in this particular debate. I'm going to hand over now to EFNA President Joka Jarsma to say some closing words. And for those of you who can remain on the call, we'll then play you a short introduction to our e-learning platform. I realize we're over time, so if anybody does need to leave at that point, we will also circulate the video with a recording of this workshop afterwards. So no worries if anybody needs to leave. My fault, I've let the discussion run on too long, but I didn't want to stop it whilst we were having such interesting conversations. But Joka, over to you. And then Elizabeth will close with your video. So Joka, floor is yours.
Thank you, Donna. And let me first of all join you in thanking all the speakers and panelists for this really, really interesting meeting. I have enjoyed every minute of it. And I think trying to think how to wrap up the meeting, the core message we have heard today is that all patients deserve a tailored treatment according to their needs. The patient at the center of the healthcare, like so beautifully illustrated by the Leonardo picture, but also not as a token in the process, as Richelle said so catchingly. So the major development that we have been witnessing is personalized medicine. Each person has his or her disease, and each person deserves tailored treatment. And this in part will be linked to the genetics, as Maria Theresia mentioned, but also include the person's very own wishes and priorities. We have to make the huge step from one size fits all to the tailored approach and look at people as people who happen to have a brain disorder. This was emphasized by many of us today. But we also have to bring the solutions to the people faster. The translation is not fast enough, and in particular that personalized, unique, individual character of the invalidating diseases that we are speaking about deserves our increased attention. But we should also remember, and I'd like to point that out in particular, that neurological diseases are not standalone diseases. Many of our patients have also psychiatric symptoms, for example. So personalized medicine will also require that we stop thinking in silos, that scientists, doctors, clinicians, patient organizations work together, because only then will we find the solutions that are needed and address the unmet needs. Because let's face it, there are hundreds of neurological disorders, and for most of them, there is no cure, and for almost all of them, the treatment is suboptimal, if at all. So that's a very important statement I would like to make. But in concluding, I think there is agreement in this group of people that personalized healthcare is there to stay, that it is the future of medicine, that it is democratic medicine, but it requires a level of responsibility, of high responsibility of all of us as we have participated in the discussions today. And with that, I would like to say that EFNA is there to work on this in the years to come, and we will give it our full attention. Thank you very much again, and we hope to see you again on this topic.
Hey everyone, my name is Elizabeth Cunningham and I'm EFNA's Communications Manager. Today I'm going to introduce you to EFNA's e-learning platform. I'll give you an overview of the topics you can learn about there, and I'll show you how to register for and use the platform. Many of you will be familiar with EFNA's training initiatives for neurology advocates. Since 2016, EFNA has run a number of in-person workshops each year as part of this programme. Due to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, it became impossible to go ahead with these meetings as we had done previously. Therefore, in 2020, EFNA developed a pilot series of e-learning modules linked to our advocacy activities. These courses aim to upskill participants in how they can effectively advocate in a virtual world by identifying and engaging key stakeholders, developing partnerships, hosting successful online events, and developing and disseminating key advocacy messages. The modules are free for anyone to access via the EFNA website at efna.net/e-learning. The courses are video-based and divided into sections that can be watched independently at times that suit the viewer. Each module includes supporting notes and worksheets, as well as the option to take a quiz on the content and receive a personalised certificate of completion. On the screen here, you'll see our module topics from Series 1. Those were EU advocacy for the brain, mind and pain community, presented by Clark Mullen, a health policy consultant. Making the most of your virtual meetings, presented by communications and leadership strategy consultant, Bettina Hausman. And e-advocacy, developing a social media strategy, presented by Marie Ennis O'Connor, a social media expert specializing in health. Earlier this year, we developed a second series of e-learning modules, this time on the topic of personalized healthcare and precision medicine. It's this series which we'd like to focus on with you today and formally launch. The series was developed in partnership with the Women's Brain Project. Maria Teresa Ferretti, Chief Scientific Officer at Women's Brain Project, presents the introductory module. And the presentation which you saw this morning was actually taken from that content. So if you enjoyed that and would like to delve deeper into the topic, you can do so in the 4 other modules in the series. Those are patient engagement, an essential element of personalized healthcare, presented by Gwendolina Grafina, a professor of consumer health psychology. Data, technology, and ethics in personalized healthcare, presented by Marcelo Janka, who you met earlier in our panel conversation. Research models for personalized healthcare, which is also presented by Maria Teresa Ferretti. And finally, regulations and reimbursement of personalized healthcare interventions, presented by Dr. Simona Melino, Vice President of the Women's Brain Project. So, how can you access these modules? To access the modules, visit the EFNA website at efna.net, And then you can choose the e-learning tab at the top. This is the homepage for the e-learning platform. And what you'll need to do is register to access the modules, which you can see here. So we can either choose to log in or register via the button here, or we can jump straight to the module that we would like to start with. So I'm going to look at the second module in the Personalised Healthcare series here on patient engagement and click Start Learning. So again, on the homepage for this module, you'll see options to log in, and those are also the place where you would register if you haven't already. So we'll click Login to enroll there. And you can see that a login page will appear, but if you don't have an account already, we can register one, and this is very simple to do. So I'll click Register an account. The username that you choose here is going to be the name that appears on your certificate of completion if you collect one of those when you finish the module. So be sure to use your full name as you would like it to appear. I'm just going to give the name Demo User. Be sure to use a password you will remember. And then hit register. Now that you've registered, you will be immediately logged into the platform. No need to go back and enter your details again. So you'll see that the login option has now changed to log out. So we'll go back to the module that we want to start with and say Start Learning. Now that we're logged in, we still need to enroll in individual courses. So at the top here, we'll choose Enroll in this course. Now that I've enrolled in the course, I'm ready to go. So on the homepage for each individual module, you'll see an overview of what that module contains. You will see who the presenter is, how long the course will take to complete, and how many separate sections are in the course. On the right here, we can see that the course is going to involve an introduction, 3 separate sections on different topics, a conclusion, and after that, a quiz. So I'm going to begin by clicking on the introduction. And here we have access to the first video in the module. When you have completed the introductory section and you're ready to move on, it's just a question of choosing the next section and so on. Now, if you want to move between sections, maybe you want to have a look at section 3, or you've gone further along and want to go back, you can hop between areas on the right-hand side here. So I could jump straight to section 3 now and take that section. When you have completed the course, there will be the option to take the quiz. And that'll be a simple test of between 8 and 10 questions on the content that was covered in the course. These are generally true or false options. And once you've completed the quiz, if you're successful in passing it, you'll receive a PDF certificate of completion for the course. At any time, you can opt to go back to the e-learning homepage. And there, of course, you have the option to access any of the other courses. So I could take a look at the E-Advocacy Developing a Social Media Strategy course that was launched last year. And again, I'll need to enroll in this course as I'm currently not enrolled. Again, we have the description of the course, the presenter, the length of time that will be required to complete the course. And something else to point out is that as well as the main course content, most courses will have accompanying materials, which you can access from this page by clicking on this materials tab. And there you'll find any downloads or additional links that the presenter felt would be helpful. So that's an overview of our e-learning modules. I hope you'll consider signing up to take some of these very soon. Finally, I want to let you know that EFNA will be launching a third series of e-learning modules on November 19th. This series will look at EU funding opportunities within the neurology space. There will be 5 modules in the series, looking at the Recovery Plan for Europe, Horizon Europe, EU for Health, Erasmus+, the EU Cohesion Policy 2021 to 2027. So stay tuned for those, and please spread the word to any colleagues who might be interested. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll consider signing up to take some of our e-learning modules soon.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thanks to everybody who's joined us today. We're wishing you a good rest of the day, and hopefully we'll be in contact soon. Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon.